Hello and welcome to another Find Out More Fridays neighborly walk, where we take you to different neighborhoods in Sacramento and show you a little bit about these unique neighborhoods and their unique histories. Now today we are going to be exploring Elmhurst, which is located southeast of central Sacramento. I am going to show you a map of it before we start our walk. It is noted by US Freeway 50 to the north, Stockton Boulevard to the west, UC Davis Medical Center, V Street and 2nd Street to the south, and then 57th Street to the east. Previous to Elmhurst being part of Sacramento City, it was actually originally ranch land owned by Williamson, Oates, and Odebert. And in 1892, the city surveyor John C. Boyd started plating out the area to make it part of a suburb he was designing called Fruitvale. And as part of this suburb, he envisioned every single property having 40 to 60 fruit trees. However, this was never built, so in 1908, a man named H.A. McClellan decided to build a different subdivision here. He envisioned a residential neighborhood rather than ranching or orchard lands, but he wanted it to be ideally aesthetic. So he started putting curbs and sidewalks in. He made it a requirement that all of the barns and telephone poles had to be in the rear of the property near the alleyway rather than in the front. And instead of fruit trees, he started planting these iconic elm trees that create the canopy that Elmhurst is known for. In 1911, Sacramento City did annex this and some surrounding suburbs to become part of Sacramento City. And I'm going to show you a map here of how the area looked in 1913. At that time, rather than the UC Davis Medical Center to the south, we had the Sacramento County Hospital and what was then the State Fairgrounds. And also, rather than US Highway 50 to the north, it was the Pacific Railroad line. But otherwise, the neighborhood looked pretty much the same back in 1913 as it does now. And even with the houses we're going to be looking at today, very little has changed. So the border did have to come in slightly to the north when 50 was built, as it was much wider than those original rail lines were. And not all of the trees are elm trees anymore. Some are ash trees or oak trees, but otherwise it is a very similar neighborhood. So let's start walking and take a look at various homes here in Elmhurst. It's a 250-acre area. Has about 1,000 different homes with Mediterranean, Tudor, Revival, and some other architectural styles. And let's see what has changed and what stayed the same since 1911. All right, we are going to dangerously cross the street. Now, this street that we started on here is T Street. It is the main drag here through Elmhurst. And that has been there since the 1913 days. I'm going to show you my map again real quick. Back then, it was California Boulevard. And it became T Street once the city annexed Elmhurst and they were trying to standardize all of the street names, so it connected to T Street and became an extension of it. This California Boulevard, or T Street, was designed with 2 parks on each end. So where we were just standing, Alex, I'm going to have you swivel and take a look there. That is one of these 2 median parks. That is Sierra Vista Park. It's the park to the east, so named because it's closer to the Sierras. The other end that we'll get to is Sunset Park to the west, where the sun sets. And this thoroughfare has stayed largely unchanged, although the name is T Street now. And as we're walking along, you can take a look that there are many different housing styles, as I mentioned. Some craftsman, Victorian, and a lot of Mediterranean and Tudor Revival, like I mentioned earlier. And the first house that I want to show you today is called the Enchanted Cottage. We're going to get to it in just a couple of houses. We have quite a walk to do today along T Street, so I'm going to try to keep it at a fast pace. But I do encourage you, if you are local to the area, I don't have time to show you everything Elmhurst has to offer. I don't even have time to leave T Street. So I do recommend coming back and seeing the many beautiful homes in this neighborhood. All right, and this house, the Enchanted Cottage that I mentioned, is right up here. You can see the beautiful lattice work and vines. It was built originally in 1947 for Guy S. Adams. You can see the cute little sign that shows it as the Enchanted Cottage. Has some whimsical front porch decorations as well. Guy S. Adams lived here with his wife, Margarita. He was influential here in town because of his connection to the school district. He was a custodian for various local public schools and was also a special officer at C.K. McClatchy High School. So this is a minimal traditional house that looks very similar as it did in 1947. We are actually going to cross the street here, but I'm going to wait till the stop sign to be a little bit safer to Alex this time. And we're going to take a look at an older house. Now, Elmhurst, as you may have seen from the map, is not too large. It's roughly 80 city blocks, and it is primarily residential, as was the envision of H.A. McClelland when he first built it. And as you walk along, you will notice the trees here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the trees later, but these were an early vision of McClelland. Part of what he wanted for this neighborhood, and of course, well, Elmhurst gets the name is from the original elm trees. All right, so the next house that we are going to talk about is the Beer House. It's a little bit older than that Enchanted Cottage I just showed you, being built in 1923, and it is right across here. All right, I'm going to stop here so Alex can show you a good look at it from this angle. Then we're going to cross the street. All right, perfect. And I am going to show you how it looked previously so that you can see not actually changed. I'm sorry, for this one quite a bit has changed, but the house next to it that we're going to look at, not too much has changed. So you can see the three main windows. If we come to the side here, there are still three main windows with a large gable, but otherwise this house looks quite a bit different. It doesn't have this side driveway anymore. The foundation might stay the same, the bones might stay the same, but it has changed quite a bit. Now, this house was never actually lived in by the Beers, Gilbert and Annie. Although they built it in 1923, they rented it out to various salesmen, managers, clerks, and insurance agent. Gilbert himself was a salesman for various local businesses, the most prominent being the Libby McNeil and Libby Fruit Cannery, which was located fairly close to here and had a lot of different neighborhood residents working there. So today it's known as the Cannery. The original brick buildings, there are 9 of them, are still located there. But you can see it's very close to Elmhurst and did have a lot of its employees in this neighborhood. Annie herself was also a businesswoman. She owned what was called a groceteria, or a small shop here in town. And the house with Elmhurst house hasn't seen as much as the Beer House. This house was built in 1913, and it had various different people living in the house over the years. The Nast family being one of the more prominent. So it was originally a 1-story house. The Nast family made it a 2-story house. There was also city architect Mary Palmer, a mechanic named Charles Olson, a man named Harry W. Yeargain, who was the chief clerk, sales manager, and timekeeper at Libby McNeil and Libby, that fruit and vegetable cannery I just mentioned. They all lived in this house at one time or another. And then to see a picture Oh, I don't have a picture of this one, but it did, other than being 2 stories, look almost identical to how it looks today. We are going to keep walking along here because, as I mentioned, we have a long walk P Street. And I'll highlight a little more about these trees. So the of Elmhurst think that these trees are really what makes the neighborhood. They are known for actually the temperature here in the summers by up to 10 degrees, make the air cleaner for the residents. They do, of course, provide shade, some leaves in the fall, but they actually struggled quite a bit in the 1970s. There was a disease called Dutch elm disease that's ravaging a lot of these trees, and the city really rallied to save them. There is a picture I have here, actually, 1975, of city workers spraying insecticide on these trees down T Street. A lot of the original elms are not present here because of that. Many of them did have to be diversity here rather than just ash as well to mitigate the spread. In 2003, all of the trees that you see here today had been replanted, and actually a grafted version of elm that the arborists found to be more resistant to that Dutch elm. This one on. So this is Coloma Community Center and Park. It was originally Elmhurst Elementary School, which was constructed in 1921 at a cost of $98,000 by Matthews Construction Company under the supervision of Sacramento architect Jens C. Peterson. And I want to read you an article about the then soon-to-be built Elmhurst Elementary School that dates to January 24th, 1921 in the Sacramento Union, which notes in dimension the building will be 35 feet by 193 feet and 2 stories high. It will contain 7 classrooms besides administration offices and other rooms. With variegated brick of local manufacture for the exterior walls and red tile for the roof, the building will be attractive. Interior walls will be of tile cemented over. In the hallways, a finer grade of tile will be exposed. All floors will be of concrete covered with linoleum. So if you take a look here, this is actually the addition, but at the original building there, it's okay, it is 2 stories high with that beautiful brick, the red tile ceiling, and although we don't have time to go inside today, I am told there are beautiful tile work in the interior. Oof. Okay, once the school is now a community center, but we'll get to that in a minute. Sorry about the technical difficulties, everyone. Hopefully you'll be able to hear me a little more clearly now. But it started as Elmhurst Elementary School. It actually didn't even keep that name for a full year. The Elmhurst PTA petitioned to change the name later that August. And so it was officially the Coloma School after that, the Coloma Elementary School. I have a picture of the first class from 1921, actually, that first inaugural year. So this right here is Elmhurst School students, the first grade. So as the Coloma School, it was here for 57 years until 1978. The first principal was a woman named Lily Langor. And it did have 2 added onto it by the firm of Dean and Dean in 1923 and 1929. Now, when it did close in 1978, the building was slated for demolition, but Pleas to the City decided to save it from demolition as a historic structure, and so they were able to reopen it in 1981 as the Coloma Community Center, and today the neighborhood still uses it for preschool classes, for different recreation activities, senior classes. There's a lot going on in this space. It's also where the city of Sacramento operates the studios of Access Sacramento, which is a nonprofit public access radio and television station for the greater Sacramento area, and I have a picture of it when it started out in 1986. Right there. It was originally known as the radio station KCBL and is also known today by the nickname The Voice. And it invites the community to bring in their own music and information for the greater community, which is pretty fantastic. We are going to keep walking along, and you can see more of the additions of this lovely school, a community center. All right. And as we walk Elmhurst, Lowe built it in 1920. About a block until continuing to highlight those beautiful trees. Very different styles of have. Alleyways like this and like McClellan envisioned, the power lines are always in the back in the alleyways, as are any sheds, barns, often garages. He really wanted that curb appeal with these beautiful trees and the curbs and sidewalks itself. All right, so we are going to keep walking along here. And I do think it's important to highlight that while we're just talking about Elmhurst this week, the history of Elmhurst is very closely related to its neighboring suburbs. So I mentioned originally this whole area was plated by John C. Boyd to be a suburb called Fruitvale. That was never completed, but Elmhurst... well, so sorry about the technical difficulties. Perhaps in another week, if we can figure out these technical difficulties, we will go ahead and show you those neighborhoods, and you can see the similarities and differences between Elmhurst, Tahoe Park, and Heights. All right, so we've made it to the corner that I was looking for, the Lowe. And this is one that has kept its original roots, but also gone through a lot of changes. I do have an earlier So this is the William Lowe house. You can see the same shaped front door, the path leading up, though it now has this beautiful brick structure around it. And the other features of the house remain largely the same, despite the facelift that it's experienced. So William Lowe lived in this house with his family. He passed away in 1948, but his wife Christina continued to live in the house until 1952. Lowe was in the hardware business with his partner George H. Murray for over 20 years. Their business was at a lot of different locations at that time, but always somewhere along J Street, which I find very interesting. He must have thought that was a great area and wanted to be in the neighborhood. So we're going to continue walking along here. On T Street, it is largely residential, and that is what most of this neighborhood is. As I mentioned, that's what McClellan's vision was. There are very few businesses in formal Elmhurst. Most of those are on the other side of Stockton Boulevard. That's where the Stockton Pacific Telegraph Company was. That's also where the Coca-Cola bottling plant was right on the other side of Stockton Boulevard, on the other side of the Elmhurst border. That's another business in the area that a lot of employees from that company would live here. All right. I'm going to show you three houses right next to each other that are just absolutely stunning in my opinion. But we have a little bit of a walk to get to them. But as we're walking, you will notice T Street right here is just a regular street. But we are coming up to that additional park. So we started at the Sierra Park in the median. This is the park. The other park along the street here, central area of Elmhurst. The little park right outside the community center. They are popular with the local residents. You can see them picnicking, having using those elm trees for the shade and for the cool summer. Biker well used. Mini Facebook Live Elmhurst right now. The temperature is quite favorable. Right. These of that Coca-Cola bottling plant that was right on the edge of Elmhurst here. It was built in the 1930s over a period of years. So you pictures of some of the other buildings not able to take today. One in particular right here, I had hoped we'd be able to walk to, but it's just a little too far, this one, little too far off of T Street. This was originally a Mormon church that was built here. However, it is now a Masonic lodge. But it contains that original architecture as so much of Elmhurst does. Despite some facelifts to the outside, so many buildings were park. And here is Sunset. Features of ancient Mediterranean or revival styles are the most awesome craftsman Victorian as well, but each of those is unique on itself. And they are all built over different periods, mostly between the 1910s and 1940s, but there are a few that were built later as well. 1980 is the most recent one. All right. Getting so close, I promise. And again, thank you for your patience. It's hard looking at how long I actually have. This is the same thing. You can really see the charm of this neighborhood, though, as we walk through, and the influence these elm trees has had. Also, just a personal anecdote. My favorite thing about the Elmhurst neighborhood is near where we started on 53rd Street off of T near S, they do a darling community Christmas area every year that they call on 53rd Street, and where the residents will decorate their houses as you can walk through. And again, it's just a very charming neighborhood where people take a lot of pride of ownership in these homes. All right. So the homes that I am bringing us to are some of the older homes here in Elmhurst. Dates to 1921. One was around the same time period. That one took longer to build, 1919 to 1922. Then the most recent of those is 1944, around the same time as that enchanted cottage we showed you earlier. Alex, if you want to take a look back just to see that little Elmhurst sign, that is the indicator that you are in the Elmhurst neighborhood right there on the edge of Sunset Park. And the fact that we've hit that indicator lets me know that we are so close to these houses. Again, I really do want to highlight that having the telephone poles in the back of the lots on the alleyway was very different when this neighborhood was constructed starting in 1909, and isn't something you'll see in many of the historic neighborhoods here in Sacramento. Along with that curb appeal, you'll often see these large front lawns where many people will spend as much time as they do in their backyards with Adirondack chairs and big swings and other things out in the front area. All right. Are going to cross the street here up to the Gatman house. The Gatman house was built in 1921. I have a picture before we get there that I can show you. Oh, perhaps not as we cross the street. All right, but here is the Gatman house. Yes, and you will see when we come up to the front of it, it looks almost identical after all these years. It was built by Julius S. Gatman. Oh, I'm so sorry. This one was actually built in 1913, so even older than I had previously said. And Julius himself lived here until 1921. That is when he sold the house to Dr. Gustav Wilson, a physician and surgeon here in Sacramento. And he did that because he was retiring. Gatman previously worked with his partner David S. Wasserman and operated the Nonpareil department store at 618 K Street. He was also director of the Capital National Bank till he retired. And then here is the front of that home. It's just absolutely stunning. You can see the detail work. And then obviously there have been some new features, but compared to the original image, the house looks very much the same. All right, and then we are going to look at the Hack House. Not quite as grand and ornate in style, but I find the story of the residents who lived here right next door to be just as fascinating. So this home belonged to Stan and Dorothy Hack, who had quite the talent athletically. They lived here in the 1940s at this home. Stan Hack was one of the most talented Sacramento area baseball players who played in the major leagues. He was a third baseman and had a career .301 batting average. Played for the Chicago Cubs for 16 years, and prior to that he was part of the Sacramento Salons on the Pacific Coast League. And Dorothy didn't let him steal all of the fame. She was an acclaimed tennis player. She was once ranked third in the nation, in fact. And she was also the Oregon State Singles Champion in 1929. This is where they lived, Stan and Dorothy Hack. All right, and then our final house, many of you may already know, the Julia Morgan house. And it's famous because of the architect who created it. Famous architect and engineer Julia Morgan, the first woman in the state of California to be licensed to practice architecture. So this is the Julia Morgan House and Gardens. Julia Morgan designed over 700 homes in California in a very prolific career, but she is probably most famous for Hearst Castle in San Simeon, California. She did residential homes as well as business properties, and this is her only residential home that she designed here in Sacramento. The home was originally designed in 1918, and it was constructed, like I said earlier, from 1919 to 1922. It was commissioned by Lizzie Glide as a wedding gift for her daughter, Mary Glide Goethe, and her now husband, Charles Goethe. At the time, the Glides were one of the largest land-owning families in California, and so they were able to afford quite an extravagant home. When Charles Goethe passed away in 1966, he bequeathed this home to the foundation at Sacramento State University. He had helped establish Sacramento State University, and it was near and dear to his heart. That foundation today is known as University Enterprises and continues ownership of the home. In 1982, the mansion was placed on the National Register of Historic Places, and in 1999, it was remodeled extensively and carefully restored to its original look. More recently, several interior rooms were also remodeled. And here is another earlier picture. Other than the landscaping, you can really see how identical the home looks. So Julia Morgan is known for the Mediterranean style. It was one of her favorites, and that is the style of the home. The floor plan is symmetrical in design. You can see a central doorway with evenly spaced windows, which is iconic of her style. And she has attention to detail with decorative molding, capitals. You can see the little towers on both ends. Some of these she actually used in Hearst Castle as well, these same techniques. Now, it's a home that Sac State uses for private events, for lectures, conferences. You can also rent it out for weddings, and so you're not able to look inside often unless you are lucky enough to go to one of those special events. But I wanted to show you some pictures of the interior of the house where you can see Julia Morgan's style continue. It's got that symmetrical layout with the evenly spaced windows, decorative elements. Here's one of the bedrooms. And then the gardens behind, again, have that Mediterranean style with a courtyard fountain. And the ornate and well-manicured garden. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today as we walked along Elmhurst and its main drag, which was once California Boulevard and is now T Street. I appreciate your patience with us, so we had some technical difficulties getting signal the whole time. And I hope once again that if you're able to come take a walk in Elmhurst yourself, it is truly lovely and there are so many things to see. And if you'd like some more historic images of Elmhurst, we do sell this book, Images of America, Sacramento's Elmhurst, Tahoe Park, and Colonial Heights, in our gift shop at the Sacramento History Museum. It's also available in local Sacramento libraries. And I thank you again so much and hope you have a great rest of your Friday. See you soon.